One question. Hokkaido milk bread. Is it really the best thing since sliced bread? Well, we're going to find out. Okay, first off we're going to be making the Tangzhong. We're going to take 200 grams of our whole milk and 40 grams of flour, and we're going to add that to a saucepan and we're going to cook it off on the heat. On a medium temperature this is going to take about 3 to 5 minutes to cook out. No time to be lazy here, we've got to keep it moving with a whisk to stop any lumps forming. Right, as soon as we've got to this stage we're pretty much done. We just need to leave the Tangzhong now to cool down to room temperature. So in this jar I've weighed out 260 grams of whole milk. Now admittedly I could have chosen a bit of a bigger container to make my life easier, but we'll go with this. To this I'm going to add 15 grams of salt, 60 grams of white granulated sugar and 1 whole egg. And not forgetting 15 grams of dried milk powder. Right, in this bowl I've got 300 grams of all-purpose flour, 300 grams of strong bread flour and 8 grams of yeast. To this I'm going to add the Tangzhong mixture that's now cooled to room temperature. Now this is really sticky stuff, as you'll find out, so make sure you use a spatula to get every last drop out of the pan. Right, give the remaining ingredients a good whisk up, and then we're going to get them straight into the bowl and bring everything together gently with a pastry card before we get our hands in there. The idea here is just to bring the flour and the liquids together just so we end up with a big shaggy dough. It doesn't need to be smooth, we don't need to knead it, we just want to bring it together, and then we're going to leave it to rest just so the flour can hydrate, and that's going to make life a lot easier when we come to knead the dough. Cover the dough and leave it to rest for about 15 minutes. Start stretching out the dough, and you can use any method here that works for you. It doesn't need to be anything fancy. As you work the dough, the texture is going to change and it's going to become silky and soft and a lot easier to work. Now you can use a stand mixer for this, but I really like to use my hands because I can feel what the dough's doing, I can feel as it develops, and I know when it's ready to move on to the next stage. Now we're going to add 50 grams of butter to the dough, and this is where it gets just a little bit messy and you're going to need some patience for sure. You are going to need to keep working this through the dough. It's going to feel like I'm lying to you completely and this is never ever going to work, but I promise you it will. Perseverance and patience. Just keep working it. Keep going, and gradually you'll start to feel all of the butter incorporate into the dough and it's going to feel super silky. Now cover the dough and leave it to rest for about 30 minutes. So back out onto the table, and as I said before, you can go completely freestyle with this, any way that works for you. The most important thing is that we're just continuously moving and working the dough. After about 5 minutes we're going to form this into a nice tight dough ball. We're going to oil a bowl, pop the dough ball inside. You can rotate it around just to get it nicely covered. We're going to cover it with a plastic bag, and then we're going to leave it at room temperature for about an hour and a half until the dough is well risen. And here it is. This was after about an hour and a half, and you can see where I'm pushing it, the dough isn't bouncing straight back. It's nice and pillowy and you can feel that it's full of air and well risen. Okay, so set your bowl back on the scales and set it to 0. Pop your dough ball inside, take the weight, and we're going to divide that by 6. We're baking off 2 tins here and we need 3 dough balls for each tin. Now you could eyeball this stage, but if you weigh the dough balls we're going to end up with an even rise and an even bake. Now these Pullman pans are non-stick, so we've got no need for butter and no need for oil. We can put the dough ball straight in there. Now if you bake the classic Pullman loaf, you're going to use the lids with these tins. And I've worked out that a dough weight of between 500 and 600 grams works perfectly for me to give the right texture and crumb. But I'm going to leave all of the details in the description, which will have the measurements of the tin, the internal area, and also a link to the products. Okay, so here you can see that I'm just pushing the dough out into a rectangle and then rolling it in one direction into a sausage, turning it 90 degrees, pushing it out flat again, and then we're going to roll it up once more until it's nice and tight. And then we're just going to perform a few kind of pulls and pushes just to make sure it's in a nice even sausage shape, and we're going to get it straight into the pan with the other dough balls and let them rise covered with a bag for about an hour to an hour and a half. They've risen to about 3/4 of the way up the tin, and now I'm going to pop the lid on and let them finish proving with the lid on, and you'll know when that's done because there'll be some resistance when you try and move the lid from where the dough is touching the underside. Straight into the middle of a preheated 200°C oven. This oven is set to the baking mode and they are going to bake for exactly 30 minutes. And 30 minutes later and it's ready. So take them out of the oven and we're going to turn these straight out onto a wire rack. Just watch the lids here because they're going to be super hot. And as you can see, probably a good idea to use 2 cloths here, just save your hands. And there we have it, beautiful golden Pullman bread with the diagonal stripes that's been left from those baking pans. You can tell the bread had been properly proved because we've been left with perfectly square edges on the loaves. And now let's check the crumb. And you can see here where the butter, the milk, the egg has all helped to make this super soft interior. So for me, this is most definitely the best thing I've seen since that supermarket sliced white bread.